And it's rolling.
All right, welcome to our random video of student newspapers. I'm Bob Carskadon, sports editor of the Reflector, Mississippi State student newspaper. These guys are
Nicole Auerbach
and Tim Rohan
with Michigan Daily. We'll talk a little bit about the balance of teams with Michigan and Mississippi State. We'll start off with you guys. What is Michigan's biggest strength?
I think it's pretty obvious from anyone who's followed college football this year. It's Denard Robinson. He's accounted for, about 90% of Michigan's offense all season.
And he's really, it's not just the ground game where he ran for over 1,600 yards, it's a pass game, and it's how he carries off that, and the threat of his run opens up the passing game a lot for Michigan.
He was the first player in college football history to pass and rush for over 1,500 yards. So how Denard goes is how Michigan goes. So he's definitely the team's strength, and he's supposedly 100% healthy for this game, which we haven't seen since September. So it should be interesting.
I think it's pretty obvious that Robinson is the guy for Michigan, and I think the way MSU can try to combat that, and we talked to MSU's defensive coordinator earlier today. The thing he was kind of saying was, we want to give up yards, not points, and kind of avoid the big play, which is what he does so well. Is break off those 80-yard runs. Fun to watch, obviously, but if you're Mississippi State, try to avoid that. And I think a lot of it is going to come down to the front seven. Kind of trying to pace yourself. I think what he does with that run, he gets out there and he makes the defensive ends and linebackers commit to trying to tackle him, and it's just one step and he's gone. And I think MSU, that front seven, really has to run more of a contain to try and slow him down, make him pass the ball, and if the secondary can do what they're supposed to do, then that's how MSU can really stop that. But it's funny that Robinson's a strength for you guys. I think it's the same way for MSU, and not a lot of people would have thought this going into the year, but I think the quarterback, Chris Relf, is the strength for MSU. He's not a polished passer by any means, but he's certainly improved as the season's gone on, and that's something the coaches have been quick to point out. The last few games, he's passed for almost 300 yards, which for MSU and for Relf are both big deals. I think he's like Robinson in the sense that he's a mobile guy, better at running than passing. Probably not quite as good at either as Robinson is, but he's a bigger guy. He's more of a kind of a poor man's Cam Newton. A lot of people like to say that he'll bowl people over, and as he goes, the MSU offense goes. And if he can scramble around a little bit and get the Michigan defense kind of off their guard and work on some of the screen passes. And he's got a big arm. He can throw the deep ball, and he is going to be the key against Michigan, I think, because there's really only so much you can do to stop Denard Robinson and the guys from scoring points. He's going to be the guy that has to help MSU keep up.
Yeah, I think that Michigan's defense is definitely not its strength, and it's had its fair share of struggles this season. But the line is probably Michigan's defensive strength.
Yeah. And
they're going to be healthy. They're getting Mike Martin back. Well, he's kind of played injured.
He's been having ankle injuries, but he should be okay.
Yeah. So I think that if they can apply pressure, that's kind of the secret to Michigan's defensive success. That if they can, put pressure on the quarterback, then it takes pressure off the secondary, it takes pressure off their weak spots. And so I think that's what's going to have to be key for Michigan defense in order, because they faced some good quarterbacks. They handled Terrell Pryor pretty well.
Well, they had trouble with Pryor because
for a half, they handled him pretty well in the first half.
In the first half, they ran for him at front, and they really kept the running game in check. And then Terrell realized he could throw the ball to the top against Michigan's very, very inexperienced secondary. And then in the second half, they started running the ball down Michigan's throat.
And it unraveled. So it's a balancing act, but it's probably going to come down to the line, the front.
Yeah, the front line can contain Relf, and as you describe him, he's kind of a 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of guy. He's not going to run away from anyone.
Yeah.
And Michigan's been struggling with tackling all year. And against Purdue, they really came out and they swarmed to the ball. But Rodriguez has maintained week in and week out, tackling, missed assignments, big issue. So it might not be pretty against Mississippi State, especially if Ballard can get it going and Relf. So we'll see.
Well, we talk about the big strengths of each team and what the other can do to stop it. For Michigan, what's the biggest weak point?
It's got to be the secondary. They've given up, 300 yards plus to some guys. Matt McGloin, Penn State walk-on quarterback, steps in, throws for 250 yards. They've got freshmen starting all over the secondary. Raven Paul. Jordan Kovacs is probably the best player, and he's a strong safety. He's a former walk-on.
Courtney Avery, a guy who was a quarterback in high school a year ago, should have been redshirted, and he's forced to play, and he's starting Big Ten. I think that it's very, very young, very inexperienced. The coaching staff has said over and over that, they're getting experience by playing and, learning and from all these mistakes and stuff. But it's been very difficult to watch, and they have set all sorts of records of yardage given up, points, over 40 points, however many straight games.
Yeah.
It's definitely, the secondary is definitely the weak spot, and other teams have definitely exploited it.
And to be fair, the front seven isn't really getting a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
It's that 3-3-5, and they haven't dialed up as many blitzes. And maybe the last couple weeks they've done it a bit more, and they've gotten some pressure. They ended the Illinois game with a blitz. It's an all-out blitz, and that ended in triple overtime.
Yep.
And so, like Nicole said, you get pressure on you, hope that young secondary, but it doesn't sound like Mississippi State's going to be throwing the ball.
Yeah, that's the thing. You mentioned that weakness, and you kind of wonder, well, what can MSU do to exploit that? The answer might be not much, honestly, but because they've lost, for you guys that don't know, beginning of the season, lost Marcus Green, kind of the go-to tight end, a big red zone threat. Yeah, and then lose Leon Berry, who was kind of the return specialist and a good receiver, a senior. And then in the last game of the year, you lose Chad Bumpus, who's really your go-to guy for the receivers. And I think it'll probably be a matchup of weaknesses in that sense that probably you could make a case that MSU secondary hasn't exactly been stellar, but it's particularly going to be the receiving core, and that's what a lot of people ask about, and a lot of people worry about with MSU is who's going to catch the ball. And there's a lot of young guys. There's a ton of young talent, but very few of them have really proven anything. And that's what Mullins talked about, that a few guys have got to switch from role players, to really being the guy, and that could be a tough transition for them, I think. And really in pressure situations, and there's been a few times this season where MSU's needed a big catch, and it just didn't really happen. So I guess my question to you is, MSU, with the lack of receivers, what does Michigan do to kind of capitalize on that?
Well, I think you bring the blitz, you focus in on the run game, but Michigan's done that before, and they've gotten run over by Wisconsin. You knew Wisconsin threw the ball maybe twice in the second half against Michigan, and they still ran for 300 yards. James White, Monte Ball, John Clay didn't even play in the game, and they still ran right over Michigan. So, it's going to be tough because it comes down to just basic fundamentals, and it's as simple as that. That's why it's frustrating for Michigan fans and for Rodriguez with the problems on defense.
It's kind of funny that their weakness is the receivers, because you would think that you don't really want them attacking Michigan's secondary, but if they're can't catch, or they're not go-to or playmaking kind of guys. Actually, Michigan has a lot of playmaking receivers. That's actually part of their strength as well, and that's helped Denard open up the passing game. But before, when you don't have that, or when they've gotten injured this season, you really see that it just breaks down, and then you do become a one-dimensional team. And that would be better for Michigan because their run defense is significantly better than the pass defense.
Even though it does have its own holes, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean everything in the defense is holes. And and one other weakness we didn't bring up: special teams. Michigan special teams. If this game comes down to a field goal, it's going to be very interesting. Michigan has two kickers, and we still don't know who's going to kick the first field goal in the game.
Yeah,
Rodriguez said that today. He's like, it depends how far it is and which hash mark they're going to kick off.
Left-footed Gibbons versus the right-footed Broekhuizen.
Yeah.
They're combined 4 for 13 on field goals on the season, and expect Michigan to go for fourth downs if it's up in the air. That could definitely happen.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you mention all this. These teams are a lot more similar, kind of. You saw some similarities coming in, but the more we talk about it, because it's the same thing. MSU had a lot of struggles with the kicking game. It wasn't until probably on week 8 or 9 that they really settled on one kicker for field goals and one kicker for kickoffs. So the last question I'll ask you, and I'll answer the same one for MSU. Who is the under-the-radar guy that's going to be a key player for Michigan in this game?
Well, you could pretty much say anyone on the defense is under-the-radar guy. Denard is the guy. So
on the radar.
Yeah. So we'd have to say Mike Martin. If his ankles are 100%, he needs to be a force in the middle. He's the guy in the middle of that 3-3-5. He's the one that, if he gets the disruption in the middle, he can take on double teams and still get penetration in the backfield. If he disrupts Ralph Ballard, makes plays in the backfield, That's where it all starts. So
the guys on the team, the other defensive players, and I mean the offensive linemen who go up against him every day, they call him he's a freak, he's a beast, he's just so strong, and you know, he has been a difference maker. He was, you know, when we talk about the success of the D line, like it's largely due to him. So when he was injured and having ankle problems, I mean, being taken out of games or you know, different possessions, it really changed the way that Michigan's defense looked. Especially because Brandon Graham, you know, first round draft pick last year, you know, Mike Martin was one of the guys who stepped into the role and, you know, created havoc on opposing quarterbacks. So I agree. I think he's definitely the key player to keep an eye on. And, you know, I can't wait to see him healthy.
Yeah, and he wasn't the same player when he was injured. That was like the first time in his Michigan career in 3 years that he really was hampered. And, you know, his leverage, you talk to anyone that watches him play, he gets under nice pads, he drives through.
It's all ankle.
Yeah, it's all lower body, so it's like, it's tough for him.
I think it actually kind of points to a similar guy that's MSU's. He wasn't previously under the radar, but kind of got there as the season went on, was Pernell McPhee, defensive end. You know, a preseason All-SEC guy, had incredibly high hopes, but thought maybe he'd be an All-American, high-round draft pick, and didn't get his first sack until I think about the 9th or 10th game of the season. But he was the same way. He was battling through injury. He didn't talk a lot about it because he was still playing, but he was never even close to 100% healthy as the season went on. So he didn't have quite the gaudy numbers, but he's a guy that opposing coaches would talk about. Said, you know, he may not have the numbers, but we have to game plan for him. We have to double team. And he finally, you know, I talked to him today. He said he's about 95-100% healthy. He'll be a big guy. And in his last game against Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl, he just blew up. It was running right through Ole Miss's offensive line, which a few people have done this season. But I think he's going to be a big guy, particularly kind of trying to contain Denard Robinson. And he was talking about him today. He said, yeah, he's a special athlete, but he's excited about the challenge. The goal for him is going to be to create that pressure without, you know, letting him get outside and run. And McPhee he's a big guy. He could play tackle if he wanted to, and so he doesn't quite have the speed to keep up with Denard Robinson if he gets on the loose. So I think he's going to be a key guy on the end of the defensive line for MSU.
And the thing to watch with that is, you know, Denard always has the option on every play. Well, not every play, but they give him the option a lot of times, give to the running back, pull out and throw it himself or run it himself. Mm-hmm. So he could be avoiding McPhee, or that's why it's so hard to contain him, because you give him options. It's all him reading the defense and picking. And in the beginning of the season, he was making very, very good decisions. Then injuries came in, they played tougher opponents, and his numbers went down. They're still very good, but...
Well, he also got slower, you know, getting around the end. Like, he would get caught. And, you know, in the beginning of the season, he'd break off for, like, an 87-yard touchdown. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's an interesting matchup I'd like to see, too.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, we appreciate you watching if you made it all the way through. You'll hear more from us as we go throughout the week.
All right, thanks.